afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure to say that at an event sponsored by Hadassah. Allow me to introduce myself, or reintroduce myself, as I haven't seen many of you for a long time, and some of you I've never met. I'm Betty Shapiro. My husband Peter and I have been at NewBridge for a little more than 6 years now. Sometime during my first year here, I was asked to organize a Hadassah chapter. And I'm pleased to say that Hadassah NewBridge is now 5 years old and has almost 100 members. In addition, there are several Hadassah members at NewBridge who belong to other chapters, and all are welcome at any and all events here. I am the acting president of Hadassah NewBridge, and as such, I am pleased to introduce today's program. As you saw from our publicity, this program will be in the form of an interview, the interviewer being Prue Thorner, and the interviewee, Susan Lewis Solomont. You may be familiar with Prue as the editor of The Bridge, our wonderful community publication. Prue and her husband, Michael, came to the U.S. 43 years ago, and thankfully, neither of them has lost their charming British accent. As far as I'm concerned, I could listen to Prue read the phone book and be entertained. But today, as the interviewer, she will use her skills to elicit what will be an informative and fascinating discussion with Susan. I don't want to be a spoiler, so all I'll say about Susan is that her mother, Blanche Lewis, is in the audience. I'll leave the rest up to Prue and Susan. You've been instructed that if you have questions for Susan after the interview is over, we will have them through the chat. Now it's up to you, ladies.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you for the introduction. I want to welcome Susan Solomont and say that, of course, the Solomont name is very well known in the Boston area. Alan Solomont, Susan's husband, was chair of the board of Hebrew Senior Life before NewBridge even began to be developed, and he chaired it through the development phase. And then there's the Susan and Alan Solomont School of Nursing at UMass Lowell. There's the Solomont Sim Center at Boston Medical Center. There's the Solomont Center for Hematology Oncology at BMC. And Susan is very well known for her work over 3 decades in philanthropy for WGBH, for the Philanthropic Initiative, and she's on the board. She was formerly chair of the board of the New England Aquarium, and she's currently on the board of the Berklee College of Music. She's the mother of 2 grown daughters, Becca, who's 34, and Stephanie, who's 29, and her close companion is Stella, the cockapoo, who is 16. So Susan, you had this amazing experience living 3.5 years in Spain. And when you came back, you decided to write these books. Tell us, you wrote 2 books actually, Lost and Found in Spain, about your experiences. And you also wrote Stella the Ambassador, which is a children's book, but tells more about that life, that extraordinary life you had living at the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. Tell us why you decided to write these books.
Well, thank you, Prue. I'd be happy to. I just want to say I really appreciate seeing all of your lovely faces out there. I want to thank Betty, because Betty, you and I started this conversation months ago about having this event in person when we still could. I'm so honored that you still wanted me to be part of this and do it on Zoom. Thanks to Hadassah and thanks to NewBridge. I come to NewBridge once a week to see my mom at least, and it's a wonderful place, and you all have a wonderful community. And I'm looking at your names, and there are many of you that I know. I won't single everybody out. But Prue, let me jump in by answering your question. In 2009, President Obama asked my husband Alan to be his US ambassador to Spain and Andorra, and it took us 1 year to get there. We arrived in January 2010. And I needed to keep in touch with people because that's the way I am. I'm very connecting with my friends and my family. So I started to write a series of letters. The first one went to 13 people. I called them holas, hello in Spanish. And my 13 email letters ended up becoming 34 email letters that went to 13 people originally and then ended up going to over 3,000 people. They were published in Spanish on the embassy website and in English on the embassy website. There are countless people who received it that I don't even know got them. And I was encouraged to put the letters into a book. But a dear friend of mine, who's a literary agent, said to me, Susan, you should write this book, but a book of letters is not a book. And your book needs to have an arc. It needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't have to be chronological. It doesn't have to be what you did each day. So I embarked on a 2-year process of writing this book. It does not tell it chronologically, as I said. Instead, it's by concept, arriving there, what it's like to travel through Spain, what it's like to be what I call a foodie in paradise, something that I think we'll talk about today, what it meant to be Jewish in Spain. My favorite chapter, it's called We All Have Jewish Blood. What it was like to leave Spain, what it was like to represent the United States above. So I never thought I'd be a writer. I know Faye Busgang has written a book. I've read your book, Faye. I never thought I'd be a writer, but the book did take its own course in my life of taking 2 years to write and 2 years to get published. The second book, though, is called Stella the Ambassador. And for those of you who are grandparents or great-grandparents, it's for 5 to 7-year-olds. It's a chapter book. And every day as I walked in Madrid with my dog, Stella, I would try to imagine what she was seeing and what she was thinking. And that became a children's book called Stella the Ambassador. And if you see behind me, I even have little mini Stellas that the publisher now sells with them. So it wasn't the expected path I would take, Prue. I never thought I'd be a writer, but lo and behold, I now have 2 books under my belt, and that might be it. No more.
You never know, Susan, because I have to tell you, we have a Erev Shabbat dinner Zoom group. It's the group that used to meet for dinner when we all could do such things. And on Friday night, one of our members who had read your book said, you know, it's really a 7-handkerchief book. Very moving, which I think is great.
Let me say one thing. The title of the book is called Lost and Found in Spain. And that was actually the last thing that got written from the book. It was originally called Tales of an Ambassador's Wife, Please Calls Me Susan, because I wanted to be called by my name when I was in Spain. That's a no-no. You're only known as Senora or Embajadora or Mrs. Solomont. But my publisher said to me, the book is about you. Let's give it a name about something you did. And people say, why were you lost? It's very hard. Prue, you've moved overseas. It's hard to leave your country. It's hard to leave your family. It's hard to leave your friends. It's hard to leave the beauty of Massachusetts, even to go on an exciting adventure and get the opportunity to represent your country overseas. But I was lost. I was also found. So that's a little bit of the background of the title as well.
Thank you. So for some of us who really aren't aware what an embassy is for or what an ambassador does, can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of why the State Department has these ambassadors and so forth?
So let me say that soft diplomacy, which is what the State Department does in 160 plus countries around the world, is really important. And people think that ambassadors go and they just have tea or, go to galas and social events. They're not. An ambassador is one president's sovereign representative from one country to another. So Alan was the highest ranking American living in Spain at that time. He oversaw all 4 branches of the military. except if we were under any kind of war situation. Thankfully, we were not. He represented all political, all economic, cultural activities that take place between the two countries. Plus, you protect the rights of all American citizens abroad, whether that be through consulate services or terrible things happen to people abroad, or great things happen. So he oversaw an embassy of 300 employees, 100 of whom were American Foreign Service officers, and 200 are Spanish citizens who have worked for the embassy for anywhere from 40 years to a year, and they are the backbone. They stay. Foreign Service officers rotate through every 2 to 3 years, just like an ambassador does. But the backbone are these local Spanish people. And in the book, I describe this in greater detail because it really, I grew to have a deep, deep, deep appreciation for our local Spanish staff, as well as the Foreign Service officers who uproot their lives every 3 years to go to a different country on the U.S. behalf.
Great, thank you. I was curious, after you had 3 decades of your own career in philanthropy, you were a businesswoman. How did you adapt to becoming essentially the accessory to the ambassador?
Well, I'm almost laughing, and I wish my husband were standing here with me or sitting, smiling behind me, because the real job that they want the spouse or the partner to do, whether you're a man or a woman, is to smile and stand and just be supportive. And I can do that. Not all that well, but I can do it. I wanted a role. And I fought really hard in what I would say was a kind way, not a belligerent way, to find a role for myself. I have had a career of my own. It's important to me. It was important that I have my own identity. And it was important that I was able to find a way to leave my own mark in Spain. So it wasn't easy. Nobody welcomed me with open arms and said, oh, here she is, she's terrific, let's use her. Instead, I had to really sort of massage and manipulate my way in an appropriate way to find a role, and I did. I worked a lot with the women in Spain. It's the old Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers things. Women do, the women get to do everything the man does when dancing, except you do it backwards and in high heels. Well, I had to do it that way too. So I help women in business. I help shine a light on what they do. The leading companies in Spain, Hewlett-Packard, Facebook, Kindle, Amazon, Pfizer, Bristol-Myers, all headed by women in Spain, but nobody would know that. So I used to organize these events where these leading top women would come talk about their lives, and I'd match them with the Americans who were living abroad. I also formed a volunteer workforce where we did community service work throughout the not-for-profit community in Spain. We helped, in anything from the hospitals there to different elderly homes or places that just needed social service work, and formed a workforce there. And then I did support Alan. I was his cheerleader, and he was my cheerleader. And for that, we both really grew a lot in our work. And I became much more than an accessory. He used to introduce me as, he used to say he was the husband of the wife of the US ambassador, and that Obama got 2 for the price of 1. And there was truth to that, except I didn't earn a cent.
The other thing that you described in wonderful detail in your book was all of the great adventures you had eating out in Spain and how that was.
Oh, Spain is with a show of your hands, how many have been to Spain? Okay, almost all of you. Spain is a culinary capital, and you can think about the most extravagant, gourmet, unusual foods where when you think something's going to be hot, it's cold, or cold, it's hot. If you think it's going to be hard, it's soft. The Ferran Adrià way of rearranging the molecules in food so you have no idea what you're eating. It's theater, and it's written about in the book. It's called A Foodie in Paradise. Or you could go down to the corner cafe and have the most delicious piece of fish And even if you're in Madrid, the center of the country comes from the freshest ocean or sea all around, the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. So every meal in Spain was outstanding. I will also say that, as to give you a little bit of a glimpse into sort of the glamorous part of our lives, was we did live in what's called a residence. We did entertain a fair amount, although we did it for specific purposes, so that, you know, we always had a goal in mind when we brought people over, more than just being social. So we had a chef. We actually had two chefs, and they would make our food and surprise us or not surprise us, but everything they did was outstanding as well. And in the book, I write about when one of our friends, some of you might know Diane and Chester Black, came to visit us. They helped teach our chef, Gustavo, how to make challah. And every Friday night, Gustavo would make us a challah bread. And, you know, and they learned how to make latkes for Hanukkah. Or they took my mother's matzo ball recipe, and they made us soup for all the Jewish holidays as well. So they were phenomenal chefs, and we also got to experience the best of Spanish cuisine, paella, and all the other special treats that you could have there.
Sounds wonderful. I was curious also how it felt for you and Alan to be in a country where Jews in the 1400s were expelled and they were not allowed back in for hundreds of years. How did it feel to you to be Jewish in Spain? And did you make it clear to people that you are Jewish?
I love this question, because I think that most people think of Spain as an anti-Semitic country. And I like to tell people that the expulsion was in 1492, and I don't want to at all condone it and say that it was terrible. They expelled Jews, they expelled the Muslims, they expelled gypsies. It was an awful, awful time. But that was over 500 years ago, and the country has changed. And actually, the country before the Inquisition was a very tolerant place where Jews and Christians and Muslims lived side by side in harmony. It was called convivencia. When we were there, Alan was billed by the press before we arrived as the Jewish millionaire. And he liked to say half of that was true. And we had made it very clear from the outside, yes, we're Jewish, but that's not going to define our roles there. It would be part of it. And we worked very, very hard to become part of a Jewish community. I'll tell a cute little story. Our first Rosh Hashanah there, we were invited to the main synagogue in Madrid, which is a Sephardic synagogue, or what we would call an Orthodox. And Alan was escorted right up to the front row in the men's section, and I was escorted upstairs behind the curtain to the women's section. And it's our first Rosh Hashanah. I'm a little teary already. I'm missing my family. I'm missing my mother's matzo ball soup. I'm missing being with everybody. And there I am sitting upstairs, and he's downstairs. And I'm seated next to the wife of the Israeli ambassador. And I said to her, I said, well, you must be used to this. And she looked at me and she said, it's my first time in synagogue in 25 years. And the two of us became fast friends. But the next day, Rosh Hashanah, that was Erev Rosh Hashanah, we went to the Mazorti, or the conservative congregation. It did not have a home. It was in a basement of a hotel. The windows were closed up. It was ugly. It was, the ugliest chairs you could find. There was nothing. People came in shorts and t-shirts. There was no dressing up for the holiday. And we walked in, and the very first thing the rabbi did was he introduced us to the congregation as Susan and Alan, not as the ambassador, not as Senor and Senora, but as Susan and Alan. We were people with our own names. And I sat there being very homesick. It was one of my lowest moments. And I just sat there with tears rolling down my face, missing home, missing my family, missing, for those of you who know Beth Elohim, which is my congregation here, missing the beauty of our building. And as I'm sobbing, the rabbi calls me up for an aliyah. And one of the women in the front row gave me her tallis to put on, which coincidentally is the same one I own at home. Talk about, are things meant to be? And he gave me a blessing and he welcomed me. And that became our spiritual home for our 3.5 years in Madrid. And I got invited back the year after we returned because the rabbi decided that he wanted, that there hasn't been a new Torah written in Spain in over 500 years. There's been none created in that way. And he would hire a scribe to help create a new Torah. And he asked if I would come over and write the first word. And I was invited over and I went to my temple to learn how to do this. And I practiced writing Bereshit. I see Janet Scheel, who would know about this. And I practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. And when I got there, they told me, all you do is put your hand on his shoulder. The scribe will write it. But that was an honor for me. And it showed what our relationship became with a very, very special, a small Jewish community, only 40,000 Jews in all of Spain. So I varied on your question a little there, but I hope that gives enough color to our time in being Jewish in Spain. Very meaningful.
I think so. That was quite an experience. So you were there 3.5 years altogether. As you look back on that experience, is there anything that you wished you'd done differently? Anything that you have any regrets about?
Yes, very few regrets. But I do wish there was something we did differently. Alan and I took Spanish lessons every day when we lived in Spain. Cada dia. We had a professor, a teacher, and we both worked very hard. I wish we had gone to an immersion class beforehand. By the end of my 3.5 years, my Spanish was okay. I would give speeches in Spanish, I would have conversations, but I wish I had started like that. And the State Department does train everybody in language, so we also did get language training. But boy, my ear just did not pick it up as quickly as I wish it would have. And I actually feel like we were fairly complete in what we did. We invited friends over. We had thousands of people from the United States come to visit us. I'm going to do a little bit of a slideshow later. You'll see a large group of where some of you might recognize some people. We invited friends. We entertained them. We showed them. We traveled the country, north, south, east, west. I know Spain better than most Spaniards do. I do wish I had walked the Camino de Santiago, the Pilgrim's Path. One day I will go back and do that. And I just, it's as much as it's a fabulous life, it's a hard life. At least for us it was. We were constantly on the go. We were constantly working hard to represent the United States, to make friends in as many ways with as many people as we can. And when I say friends, form bonds, share values, have relationships. And I wish my regret is that we ran out of time. There's a time for everything, and there was a time for us to come home.
Yeah. It sounds like from the book you were actually happy to come home when the time came, even though you'd had wonderful experiences.
I was happy. 3.5 years is a long time to be in that role. We would get up every day by 6, 7 in the morning. And I say that, I get up at 5, 6 here. But there you don't go to bed until 1, 2 in the morning. You all know about the Spanish dinners that you have at 9, 10 o'clock at night. So we were exhausted. We worked hard. Alan, I never saw him work harder in his life. And, he's very beloved as the ambassador. And he did a great job. It runs its course. And you do want to get home. You want to we used to call home the warm embrace of home. And I'm looking out my window now, there are green trees and soft light. It just feels like it embraces you. And I was ready for that. I was ready. Hard to leave. We called our experience living somewhere over the rainbow. And we were returning to Kansas, or Boston, as the case might be. But we were leaving our rainbow world that was just a wonderful world where the U.S. ambassador is first among equals. The United States is revered overseas. President Obama, I would walk down the streets and people would come up to me and say, I love your president, I love your country. It's a really amazing feeling. But now I'm ordinary Susan.
Yes.
Just call me Susan.
So Susan, you're going to be, I understand you're willing to do a book signing at NewBridge after the pandemic is over. And you have donated a book to the library. So Lost and Found in Spain is in our library. I know that Wellesley Bookstore has this in stock too. And of course it can be obtained on Amazon or on Kindle. I'm going to ask you now if you would narrate a slideshow, just giving us a window into what it was like to be in Spain and the wonderful things that you saw and did and made happen.
Sure. Before I do that, though, because Nancy Vega's going to help me, I'm going to hold up Stella the Ambassador dog as well, which I will give Prue and Betty the information on, as well as the little dogs. Also available on Amazon and in bookstores. The dog is only available through the publisher. So I'll give you all that information. You know, you do have to sell your books sometimes. Yeah. So forgive me for doing it. But let's do a slideshow.
Okay. And I hope Stella is still doing well.
Stella's at the spa today. She's getting her hair done.
Okay.
All right. So I thought I'd bring you a little bit on our journey. And I forgive this picture being a little bit blurry. Seated at the desk is my husband, is Alan, with our daughters, Becca next to me and Stephanie, Becca 34 years old now, Stephanie 29, getting married next year, we hope. And standing next to me is Jack Liu, who is the Treasury Secretary. Every ambassador gets an official, you get to sign official documents, you get sworn in the State Department in what's called the 7th floor. And there we were. Secretary Clinton was the Secretary of State. She would have sworn Alan in, but she was out of town, as she was always traveling around. So there's Alan signing his documents. This is early January 2010. Next. Arriving in Spain. I don't want you to think it's all glamour and glitz, but I'm going to show some glamour and glitz. First of all, there we are dressed to go to a reception at the Royal Palace. The monarchy invites the ambassadors every year for a welcome reception. We were in an armored limousine, not a limousine, but a car, a sedan. When we did official functions, you see the American flag and the State Department flag. And if you ever see a diplomatic license plate and it says 001, that's the ambassador. And that was our car. That was us getting ready to go to our first reception with, at that time, it was King Juan Carlos and his wife, Queen Sofia. Right now in Spain, there's his son, Philippe, is now the king, and his wife, Leticia, who was a commoner, a journalist. How do you like that? Next slide. That was our residence. We lived on for those who know Madrid, on the Paseo de Castellana, this gorgeous tree-lined street in Madrid. We were on a few acres set back, and we had, it's actually a big block of a building, but it was quite lovely inside. And you see it decorated. It's decorated here for July 4th. The bunting on the balcony, the flags, they go in order of when each state entered the Union. We stood on the top, we would give remarks. Our Marine delegation would present the colors to us. We would stand with the Pledge of Allegiance and sing the national anthem. And the Spanish national anthem, which has no words, was played at the same time. Every country celebrates its National Day. However, the United States, the July 4th celebration is probably the grandest. We would have anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 guests come to, that we would know. Not all by name, but all to say, yes, it's nice to see you. One of those. Let's go to the next one. And I'll show you what the embassy building looks like. That was actually our embassy building, and we took over its parking lot. All embassies are really buttressed for security purposes, so you can't see any of the street here. And we had something very special about our embassy building, which is not typical, and that is there was a secret passage in it, and it linked into our residence, our home. Most residences are in separate locations. Ours was right there, which allowed me, in particular, access to all the activities within the embassy building. And, I got to know staff better. I was part of it, where my counterparts from all the other countries all lived in one of the suburbs. So I had the pleasure of being right in the heart of Madrid. We hung the flag, and we learned a lot about how you hang flags. So as you can see, the stars and stripes are where they should be. If you hang it vertically, sometimes it's not. And we learned that lesson. Next. We had many visitors, and perhaps none more important than Secretary of State Clinton, who came. She worked with, that's my daughter Stephanie at the end there. She worked tirelessly when she came to Spain. Up early, late dinners, meeting with officials, and when we asked her to come to the embassy to meet with those that work at the embassy, she said, of course I would. The other person who did that I don't have a picture of, I didn't put in this, is Vice President Biden. Came as well, and he came to welcome, to thank Spanish troops for their support of U.S. troops in Afghanistan. And I will say that Vice President Biden, when he came to the residence to meet those that work at the embassy, he shook every hand and kissed every baby, and he really connected with everyone there, just like Secretary of State Clinton did. For those who recognize this man, not my husband, but the one in the middle, that is Leonard Cohen, the poet and the great singer-songwriter. This is at I chose to do some of the celebrities for you. Leonard Cohen was awarded something called the Prince of Asturias Award. It's the Spanish equivalent of the Nobel Prize. And it's a ceremony that's done with great pomp and circumstance up in the north part of Spain in Oviedo in the Asturian province. And Leonard Cohen was as much a gentleman as we have ever met. Alan said to him, I've been listening to your music for over 40 years. And Leonard Cohen looked at him and said, it doesn't look like it did you any harm. He was just wonderful. He thanked in his speech, he thanked the Spanish soil, because he said from that soil grew the trees that gave the wood for the guitar that he played. He's a magnificent man, and we mourn his loss. Next. Be still my heart. I had the pleasure of being with Antonio Banderas. Yes, Antonio Banderas, in his hometown of Malaga. As you can see behind us is the Mediterranean. The Holy Week, the week between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday, is known as Semana Santa, Holy Week in Spain, and there are processions that take place throughout the country. Antonio is from Malaga. Through mutual friends, his best friend growing up and very dear friends of ours from Spain, they invited us to come down to be part of the festivities. And I got to stand next to Antonio and have him whisper and sing in my ear for 1 hour, telling me all about what was going on. I don't remember any of it except for Antonio Banderas whispering and singing in my ear. One of my favorite visits, and perhaps some of you will recognize some people here. Faye, I'm not sure if you were you on this trip? Maybe. See, honey. This is when Temple Beth Elohim, 60 members of our congregation came to visit us. There's Stella the cockapoo right up front in Marcy Balter's hand. The temple came to do a trip following the route of the Jews through Spain. We welcomed them to the embassy. We had a welcome dinner of a Shabbat dinner where we invited 60 of our friends from the Jewish community, and actually the Christian community as well in Spain, where people got to know each other and speak. We had a beautiful Shabbat service, and we did singing of songs together, and everybody had too much food and, of course, too much wine, and really a memorable trip, standing outside on our front steps there. And the other person who I like to say, be still my heart, Rafa Nadal. He did not come to the US Open this year, but he did come to the embassy. He needed his visa renewed. And I will say that it was one of the few things that I said Alan did not do right. Alan granted him a 10-year visa, which is appropriate. It was nothing out of the ordinary. I said he should have given him a 10-day one so he could have come back every 10 days to get it renewed. Rafa is a perfect gentleman. He too spent as much time as we wanted with Spanish staff. We bought tennis balls and he signed them for anyone who wanted them. Later that night, we saw him at one of the Real Madrid football or soccer games. He's a real Real Madrid fan, sort of like the equivalent of the Yankees, although we never felt about it that way. And we awarded him, as you see in there, the flag that flew over the embassy the day that he came to visit. And that would be the kind of gift we would give dignitaries or people to welcome them and show that they were esteemed in our minds. My favorite visitor, my mom. My mom came in November and we had a wonderful time with her. We traveled a little bit down south, down to some art towns. We're in the town of Cuenca there. And Mom, I hope I don't embarrass you with this story, but our housekeeping staff took such good care of us. Everything was European style. You know, my pillowcases got ironed every day, and they ironed one of my mom's nightgowns, and the lace on them is still so perfect. I don't think you've worn it again since then. But having my mom visit was just a highlight. And I mentioned our temple congregation there, Bet El. They finally found a home, a permanent home. First time they had a home. And they had a ceremony to dedicate it. And they had 7 Torahs, and they asked if I would help carry one of them in. And there I am the night of. When I say that they found a home, please don't picture it at all like synagogues we know here. It was in the downstairs of an apartment building, yet it had enough rooms for kids to have a religious school and enough room for people to gather on Friday night and Saturdays and for the congregation to go past. When they brought the Torahs in, they asked 7 different people to hold each one, and then they had a young member of their congregation indicating the future. It was really remarkable. So Alan, like everybody, has a birthday every year. And Alan's favorite food are frankfurters, or hot dogs. And every year on his birthday, I would surprise him with a different hot dog treat. Until one day, I saw the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile in Madrid. And I tracked it down and I brought it onto our embassy grounds. Not an easy thing to do. I mean, security is security. But we brought this, they would not let him ride in it, but he was allowed to stand. And they set up, little kiosks all over. And again, we welcomed all the embassy staff to come celebrate his birthday with us. It's a fun chapter in the book if you get to read it. I chose this slide. It's a hotel in the Rioja, the wine country in Spain. It's designed by Frank Gehry, who designed the Guggenheim Museum up in Bilbao. But this is actually a hotel. That's its facade. You could see how the purple in the facade sort of looks like red wine, Rioja wine. A very, very elegant place to stay. And even though Frank Gehry's American, architecture in Spain is magnificent. You could have really traditional buildings, or you could have something like this. So I just chose to show you something like this. Now, representing our country, our emblem for the State Department. The book, should you choose to find it, I hope you do choose to read it, and I really am happy to sign anyone's, or if you have trouble finding it. That is the Grand Via that you're looking up at. I once had a contest to see whether people thought it was sunrise or sunset behind it, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And the last slide, Stella the Ambassador wearing her American flag bandana. So a little bit of this. I think we're going to do some question and answers now. Is that right, Betty?
If you would. I don't see any questions at the moment. So I will start with one that comes from the Shapiro household. Give you time to write your questions into the chat. So I would like to know, you mentioned a chapter in your book called "We All Have Jewish Blood." And I would like to hear more about that, why you chose that title for that particular chapter, without giving away the whole
No,
topic of what it's about.
I won't give it away because there's no secret in this. And that is that during the Inquisition, Jews chose chose is a broader word than I should use. Some went underground and continued to practice their Judaism. There's a wonderful book called The Mezuzah in the Madonna, because they used to hide mezuzahs in Madonnas so that they would not be found out. During the Inquisition, again, a terrible time, they would test whether you were Jewish or not by offering you ham, the hamon, and to see if you would eat it. So Jews either converted, they stayed underground, they were expelled, or worse, they were slaughtered. And in time there, we spent a lot of time trying to explore religious identity. And one year, when it was Rosh Hashanah, it was the same as the Iftar celebrations for the end of Ramadan, the Iftar dinners. And the same prayers were said, different languages. The same sorts of foods were eaten, different customs. We tried to show how we all have differences, and we all also have similarities. And one year, Alan and I led a group from the ADL to come to Madrid, to come to Spain, and we wanted to show that this country has become a much broader, tolerant community, society again. And when we were there, we went to one of the art museums, and we always invited Spanish friends to join us because we wanted people to meet each other. And I said to a very prominent Spaniard, one from a family that dates back to the king giving him land in, the 13th century. And I said, do you think there's anti-Semitism still today? And his comment was, yes, there's anti-Semitism. We don't want to whitewash it. However, we all have Jewish blood. We all come from these places. And his family name is one that a New York Times writer, Doreen Carvajal, she wrote about tracing her roots. Catholic girl from San Diego wrote about tracing her roots down to Arcos de la Frontera in the south of Spain to discover her Judaism. And there in the walls, you could see on the angle where mezuzahs used to hang. It was the story that it's not, everything is that much of a melting pot. There's a little bit of everything in every one. And therefore, we all have Jewish blood, was what he said to me. And it struck me as really how I like to view what Spain has become and how tolerant and accepting it is. So that was that story. We also, on that trip, we went down to the town of Seville in Andalusia, where private citizens founded a Jewish museum where they really wanted to bring together artifacts. The Spanish government has a cabinet office, like we have different cultural identities. They do there. And there's a Casa de Sepharad, the House of Israel, the House of Sepharad of the Sephardim, where they really work to restore a lot of what was Jewish culture. So, it's part of the Spain I'd love everybody to keep in their mind, as well as we think of some of the harder parts.
Thank you. Judy Goldman writes that she enjoyed your book, and she wants to know about the training that you and Alan had prior to moving to Spain, the Ambassador School.
Yeah, we went to Ambassador School. That was really something else. All ambassadors. Okay, so let me also say that Alan is what's considered a non-career ambassador, meaning he did not come through the Foreign Service. Okay? Our country has, others call them political. We don't actually like that term. We prefer to be non-career, and they bring a lot of talent to what they do. And a non-career would probably not get sent to Iraq or Iran or, a really much more dangerous, politically hot place. But they will get sent to places where you do need to form these, strengthening bonds between countries. But all ambassadors and all their spouses and partners go to ambassador school. You go in smaller cohorts. We had 14 in our group. And you go for 2 weeks, stand at the State Department every day from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. And you learn about everything there is about your country, about the alphabet soup of what's the RSO, Regional Security Officer, the FBI, the CIA, they all have CIA agents embedded in them. I never knew who they were. You don't learn about how to greet people or which fork to use. That's not what it's about. It's really about the hard work that takes place. You get media training. You form bonds with people so that you have a cohort that you can then talk about things. So I'll just tell you one cute story. In our group, they talked about safety. And all embassies are guarded by Marines. The U.S. Marines guard the embassy. But in certain countries, like Spain, you have the Spanish police, the Guardia Civil, or in another country, their own police force, guarding the ambassador. The ambassador. Note I didn't say their wife, partner, spouse. They guard them. And we had 3 security guards guarding Alan. There was always a front car, and then 3 security people who carried weapons. And one night we were in Barcelona. I'm veering my story here. And Alan and I had worked hard that day, and we were coming back to our hotel. It's about 7 o'clock at night. And Alan said, gee, why don't we get a bottle of wine? I said, great idea. We just passed a liquor store. Let's go get it. He said, I'm exhausted. Do you mind going? And I said, no. And I walked out into the streets of Barcelona by myself. And Alan and his 3 security guards walked into the hotel where he walked into his room. I had no security. But the story I was really going to tell was that in the car, the ambassador always sits curbside in the back. And that is so, God forbid, something happens, the security could jump out, get him or her out of the car to safety. And in my group, one of the wives raised her hand and said, excuse me, but what about me? And they looked up and they said, we'll do the best we can. Thankfully, we were safe. But in ambassador school, you learn about this. It's a grueling 2-week process. In the book, I write how there are the curriculum, the CVs for all the ambassadors, not one for any of the spouses. Imagine Hillary Clinton not having her CV in a book when her husband was doing, it was somewhat of an outrage. And I hope that our State Department has changed that by now.
I guess Prue is not finished asking questions because she posed one in the chat. She says, have you been back to Spain? Is it different for you now?
Oh, yeah, it's different. We get off the plane, we carry our own luggage, we get in a taxi cab, we go to a hotel. We go back a lot. Up until the pandemic, we had been going back 2 to 3 times a year. We always go to Madrid for at least a week. We want to see our friends. And then we generally travel someplace just to have a little bit of downtime. But, again, in Spain, Alan could not drive. So we were always driven. I was able to drive. I had my own car there. I drove 3,000 miles in 3 years, not very much. But, we wanted to go back to explore the country again on our own. And we do have a lot of good friends there. When we go, I come back in need of a vacation because we have breakfast with somebody, lunch with somebody, afternoon, what they call copita, with somebody, dinner with somebody at 10 o'clock at night, maybe meet some, it's eating and drinking all day long, but we have a lot of good friends. And I'd like to say I'm going to actually start doing my own version of an hola letter in reverse because I want to keep in touch with more people. Spain has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. and they shut down very early. I'm actually very glad not to be the ambassador now. It would be very hard to do your job without being able to get out and get around the country. It's a scary time there, and they too are having a resurgence right now. And, my closest friend in Spain, she was our residence manager. Her son went to Emerson College. She could not come for his graduation. It was virtual. He's going to acting school in New York. She can't come over. So we use WhatsApp and we FaceTime and keep in touch that way. But yes, I love going back. And I do make this, for all the groups that I speak with, I like to offer that if you plan a trip to Spain, hopefully we'll all be able to travel again soon. I'm happy to make recommendations because I do love the country. It's a great place to go. I could also tell you things like where to get your hair cut and all the other things that you want to know. I'll tell you one cute story that goes back to my lost part. We had a chef to prepare our meals, but every now and then I missed things like CVS. I missed going into a store and looking for shampoo to choose my own. You have to go to a pharmacy where you ask for it. I missed going into a supermarket where I could choose my items. So I decided I'd go out one night on my own. Ellen was out of town. And I decided I just wanted to buy some manchego cheese and some olives. And I went into our local supermarket and I found the cheese. And there were about 40 different types of manchego. And I got overwhelmed and I said, I'm not buying it. I moved on. I was still early in my days there and I was nervous about speaking poorly. So then I went over to the olive stand. And there was a table that must have been 10 feet in diameter with about 50 different types of olives. I got overwhelmed. I didn't buy olives. I found a bag of potato chips. I brought them home. When I got inside our residence, we had footmen. Yes, we had footmen. I felt like I was in Downton Abbey. Again, don't think it was that much of an overprivileged life. It was a good life, but we worked hard. He looked at me and he said, Senora, patatas fritas. I said, would you like them? He said, I'd love them. And that was my dinner for the night. I gave them to him. Things like that. Now I go into the supermarket and I know how to order.
Well, thank you, Susan. That was delightful. That seems to be the end of the questions in the chat room, but I think you've given people enough information to be encouraged to read your book because there's so much there. There really is, and it's this presentation today has been delightful and enlightening. Thank you, Prue and Susan. And Susan, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your service. You did America proud.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I feel very proud of it too. And I don't want anyone to ever think I take it for granted for one bit. To serve our country and the pride that I felt overseas stays with me, and I appreciate all that you do for Hadassah and all that NewBridge does to keep a community vital, thoughtful, intellectual, active. And I hope that you all get to go back into classrooms and the dining room and all the other wonderful things that NewBridge has to offer soon.
Well, thank you for that. I think we all wish that. So since this is a program sponsored by Hadassah, as you just heard, you could reasonably expect to hear something about Hadassah. And so you will. A Devar Hadassah, an infomercial, if you will. When we first began planning this program about Spain, my first thought was to connect Hadassah directly to Spain by way of Hadassah International. Hadassah International? Wait a minute. We're an American organization. Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, Inc. Well, in 1983, we created a branch on an international level. Its mission is threefold: to enhance the image of Israel through the work of the Hadassah Medical Center, to provide support to the Hadassah Medical Center so that it remains an academic center of excellence for healing, teaching, and research, and to serve as a bridge to nations through medicine. Now, in 2020, Hadassah International spans 5 continents with 13 active units, but alas, none in Spain. It is made up of volunteer men and women who raise funds exclusively for the Hadassah Medical Organization. In the past 5 years, they've raised over $37 million. They do this by engaging in innovative business partnerships and direct solicitation. And they sometimes have elegant galas and events to fulfill this goal, like they might have been at your embassy. They do this because they believe that advancement and cooperation in medicine transcends politics, religion, and national boundaries. The universal language of medicine allows Hadassah International to build bridges between nations and help to establish research and clinical ventures between Hadassah Medical Center and medical institutions around the world. The latest example of this is the creation of a manual of treatment for COVID-19 that is available in 7 languages. If you're curious and want to learn more about Hadassah International, Google Hadassah International, just like I did. And with that, I thank you all for being here.